I think to start, since we have broached the topic of cancellation, let me just pull up this actual web page of the Statistical Abstract, which is one of our main exhibits here. And I will just Google it first. And when this red box first appeared on the page, I was looking at that and hoping it would go away at some point, but it never has. And the data collection for the Statistical Abstract was terminated. The final version of the Statistical Abstract of the U.S. as published by the government has already been issued. And that's, one of the examples that is really driven the topic here, but we'll also talk about other disappearing government publications and the implications, and some things that are emerging as replacements. So this is a list of some of the things that have been recently discontinued: the Statistical Abstract, the State and Metropolitan Area Data Book, the County and City Data Book, the USA Counties Database, the Current Industrial Reports, Consolidated Federal Funds Report, and some special reports like the Trends in the Well-Being of America's Children and Youth. And there has been a reaction to this. There have been a lot of campaigns and protests, but some of this, it has at least staved off action for the American Community Survey right now, but it has not saved some of these publications. This is a quote that I found. I couldn't have been more shocked than if I had heard the publication of the Bible had been discontinued. And as someone who's been a frontline reference librarian working with people looking for statistics, looking for data for many years, I pretty much agree with that quote, that the Statistical Abstract in particular it's the starting point. It's the thing that you always begin with when you have a numerical data question. And to see it go is certainly quite a shocking event. It looks like it may come back in other forms. But before we get to the future, I will throw in some past as well, so we hit all the themes, to talk a little bit about how the Statistical Abstract developed as a leading publication. It does have an interesting history. It began as the Statistical View of the United States in 1854. It was one of the earliest of these kind of manuals that compiled statistical information. As we saw from the history of the census records were also not as widely distributed in the forms that we're used to them today. But the Statistical View of the U.S. came out of the Treasury Department. That was where the initiative to collect some information came. It became the Statistical Abstract of the U.S. in 1879. That's when it became mostly an annual publication. And there's a handful of years which are listed there where there wasn't a publication. In most of those years, they combined a couple of years into one. And in 2004, they actually changed the numbering scheme. So if you look at anything prior to that, for example, the 1879 issue, it reports 1878 data. But they decided to change the numbering scheme so that the 2005 edition reports the year of the data itself. And actually there's a typo there. That the 2012 edition is now reporting data up through 2012. Now, originally, as I mentioned, the data came out of the Treasury Department, and there was a focus more on commercial statistics, the amount of steel produced and the amount of foreign trade. but that has evolved over time. If you really want to know all the details, there's a really great article that's in Reference and User Services Quarterly by Mark Anderson with the citation there that really takes you through all of the history. But as a product of its evolution, it was reorganized. It went out of the Treasury Department into the Census Bureau. And previously previous to 1902, they had organized the census just every 10 years. Let's start up and let's run a new census. 1902 was when the Census Bureau became a permanently established organization. And so then they could start putting out an annual publication. And the Statistical Abstract moved over under the Department of Commerce and Labor and then to be managed by the census. Because it was now under the census, the Statistical Abstract moved away from that commercial emphasis and started to put out the kinds of population and demographic information that we know today. And because of that, the spin-off publications emerged, things like the County and City Data Book, which has changed titles over the years, came out of that movement to provide more and more demographic statistics. Just to put that in a little bit of an international context, again, the Statistical Abstract was one of the earliest, but also other nations produced their own statistical abstracts. There was the Statistical Abstract of the UK in 1854. It's now the Annual Abstract. Interestingly, compared to the experience that we'll have with the ceasing of government publication of the US Statistical Abstract, the UK abstract was outsourced to a commercial publisher for a little while. From 2006 to 2011, it was published by Palgrave, and it looks like it's being taken back. Some of you may have more information about this than I do, but looking at the information on the website, it looks like it's now being returned to UK government control. Dates of some other statistical yearbooks are there. Germany, 1874, France, 1878, Switzerland, 1891. And pretty much this is something that every major developed country has followed suit and produced an annual statistical abstract that puts their information out on the world stage. This is an official, reliable, we heard Mary Alice Bache refer to the obligation to put out verifiable, reliable information. And these statistical abstracts do that on a national and an international basis. And I think we have to be aware that we're part of that ecosystem out there with all the other nations and their first line of information. And again, sort of looking at other things that can give us an indication of what might happen when the statistical abstract goes away in its government form. There is an interesting case that has occurred in the past. That is the U.S. Industry and Trade Outlook. This was up through the mid-90s was considered a Bible for business forecasting in a way. It was produced by the Department of Commerce and had official government forecasts of economic activity in lots of different industry sectors. And they decided to cease publication in 1994. It went a couple of years in limbo, and it was brought back by McGraw-Hill in collaboration with the Department of Commerce. But it only lasted a couple of years in that format. It came out, wasn't quite the same as it was before. It had sort of lost that momentum, and 2000 was the last year that was issued. And that's still kind of a gap in the information landscape if you look back and remember that as a government, and maybe that was part of the issue behind its cancellation, but as a government-sanctioned forecast, something that was sort of a conservative look at the future without relying on any one analyst perspective. And once it went out of the government sphere, it sort of withered away. So the title of this presentation refers to the disappearance of the data book. And I think part of what is happening here is, if you ask yourself, why would we cancel the statistical abstract? Why this major publication? Is this perception that it is, perhaps there's a perception that this is just a book with numbers in it, which is not as useful as it used to be. There's the internet now. And it's true that sources like the county and city data book, which you used to use all the time, are not as relevant as they once were. But the collection of data for the statistical abstract is not dependent on the book form. There's a website associated. There is lots of information that's easily downloadable there. But I think the fact that it's packaged as a book maybe ties into this impression that it's a data book. It's something obsolete. It can all be done on the internet. But we are losing a lot in that process. And I think we saw in Alana's presentation the complexities of the American Community Survey. If you think about throwing a novice user right into the deep end of the pool with something like that, or asking them to delve into tables in the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, that's going to be difficult for a lot of people. And one thing that the statistical abstract did really well is synthesize all that, distill it, give you the most important tables. Here's something easy to understand that you can take away. And maybe the expert user can replace that, but there's this whole aspect of training the next generation to go to these sources, to use these sources. And if you can show them the statistical abstract and say, this is a great starting point. This can guide you to all of the other worlds of government information. All of the data that you can find is referenced there. But if you just need the basics, it's here. If you need pointers to the next steps, it's here. It provides that in one location. If you're a high school student, how did you first start learning about these government resources? It has to be through small steps. If you lose a major source like the statistical abstract, where is that going to, that kind of learning and introduction to things going to happen in the future? I'm not really convinced that there will be a great substitute for that. And again, the international aspect, that if you were trying to find out, if you're trying to find out about the UK or Japan or China now, there is a one-stop place to go. And to say that someone in China can easily navigate the American Community Survey site to find accurate statistics about the US is, there's an impact there, that there's something being lost. And as I alluded to with that story of the US industry and trade outlook, is there is a danger here of a vicious cycle. Now we're going to talk about the commercial substitute that is coming for a statistical abstract. But if it starts to cost more, if it's not as widely available, maybe stops being used as much, this reduces the demand, and maybe it's not seen as an important publication anymore. There's a danger there that can lead to a vicious cycle where the role of the publication collapses relatively quickly. And again, just alluding to some of the themes that we've been talking about all day, is it really, I would say it's definitely not a good thing that this source, which used to be freely available to everyone, and represented kind of the greatest hits of data from a certain perspective, is now no longer freely available. Well, why was that information collected? This is just an interesting quote to support that that idea. And so that's sort of the end of my half. We're talking about the doom and gloom surrounding the demise of the statistical abstract, and Bobray is going to take us further into lots of other implications here.
So most nations have a central statistical office. Our country does not. So in most places, everything is emanating out of one body. And so one of the really wonderful things about the statistical abstract of the United States was, though it was done by an agency, the Census Bureau, it was gathering data from many different agencies, from justice, from health, from crime, etc. And so again, it was the one-stop shopping. So when we first heard about the statistical abstract going away, everybody started screaming and crying and so forth. And about the same time, I read something else that scared me much more. And that was that another item was going away, and that was something called the Consolidated Federal Funds Report. Now, how many people even know what the Consolidated Federal Funds Report is? So very few people. And another one which also got even less attention, the Federal Aid to States Report. So what these documents do is they actually tell us how we spend our money, down to the lowest geographic level. So I can see why there was no outcry from Congress, because this actually gave in enormous detail, program by program, community by community, what was the impact. And so these two, they were not being discontinued for bad reasons, they were being discontinued for good reasons. So what were those good reasons? Well, the US government said, we want to be more transparent. So the way we're going to be more transparent is we're going to eliminate the major reports. But in turn, we're going to give you one place, one-stop shopping, and that was something called usaspending.gov. So everybody thought, okay, this is fine. We're still going to have everything. Except what actually happened was quite a bit of the data did not make this new site. And there was a lot of outcry, and a lot of people started saying, this is interesting. You know, here we have Mr. Transparent President, and one of the first things that's done is we start eliminating all of the reports. So a lot of attention was paid to this, and slowly a lot of the information has been added back. So the good news is that it's getting better. It's not quite as comprehensive as the previous ones were, but it is getting much better. So if we had done this presentation 2 years ago, we'd have seen that there were no subaward contracts. So if you think about the way most things are done in this country, everything is lumped together. So you find out the big picture, the way bills are passed, is someone wants this one piece for their state, and then they lump 49 other things with it. Well, the same thing with this, in that you weren't finding out a lot of the subawards, the details. That began adding in October 1st of 2010, so that's now there. Grants. This got a lot of attention because certain agencies, most of their money is distributed through grants. So the National Endowment for the Arts, for example, it's almost entirely grant driven, and that was not there. That got added December 1st, 2010. So again, we're getting better. The other thing was that a lot of the small agencies were listed as miscellaneous or other. It did not make the agencies feel good, but it also meant that people who were trying to find this information couldn't find it. And now, very recently, they started breaking these out. So again, a good step. One of the other complaints was that if you're only looking for your congressional district, fine, but often people wanted to see what the impact was on a state or the different congressional districts that, let's say, a senator represented. And that is actually harder in this version. You have to use an advanced search, but at least you can do it. The good news is that it's more timely. The data is being loaded much more quickly, but it's less accurate. It doesn't have quite the level of detail that the previous one had. They do have a really nice FAQ telling you what is missing, and some of the things that are not there, salaries and wages, Complete documentation. They don't, again, what Alana talked about, it doesn't really explain to you as well. And you have zip codes there, but not counties. So, and there's some other levels of geography that are also not there. So that's one item that we had a shift, but at least it's a shift. As I mentioned, in our country we have different agencies producing items related to what their department is. So one of the ones that I use heavily involves crime. So there are two major publications that come out on crime in this country. One is called Crime in the United States, which is really a summary of the Uniform Crime Report. So this tells us how many murders, rapes, larceny, etc. there were, but really that's about it. That publication is still going on. We haven't heard anything about it going away. But the other one, which has had a sort of odd relationship for a while, is called the Sourcebook of Criminal Justice Statistics. This one, it's one that was contracted out. The Department of Justice actually funded it, and SUNY Albany produced it using the government funding. And as of October 19th, the funding ended. And the notice actually came quite a bit earlier. This was a 40-year partnership. And so when you go to the site, a little hard to read, but it actually tells you this, and it tells you, please do a survey. And really what they're hoping is that a lot of people will come forth and talk about how important this is. So your homework is after this, everyone go out and fill this out, because it really is important. So what are some of the types of things that you will find in here that you will not find in Crime in the United States? Reality is anything other than just how many crimes were committed. So if we're trying to find out things such as items about the number of police officers, things about the number of prisons and so forth, those are the types of items. They also have quite a bit of private data. Same thing with the Statistical Abstract of the United States. We think about it as a report of the government, and a lot of the information comes from the government, but there's also a lot of private information in it. Same thing with this. So they also looked at things like perceptions, fears, attitudes, and public opinion sources such as Gallup were used to get the summary information. I want to show you just the table of contents of this. And you can see sort of the wide range of topics. So a lot of information on corrections, courts, the financing of the justice system, things on judges, law enforcement, etc. The sources, again, the Department of Justice that you would expect, but if you notice, there's also a number of private agencies, including Gallup, but also some law firms, some different public opinion sources, etc. Now, the Statistical Abstract, in its latest version by the government, it had 80 tables, over 27 pages that dealt with crime. This has 500, and we know all the size of the Statistical Abstract. It's a pretty small book. The Sourcebook of Criminal Justice Statistics, which has only existed electronically for almost a decade now, but in PDF form, it's actually large pages, 544. So needless to say, a lot more detail. Now, the items coming from the Statistical Abstract, it's an abstract from the Sourcebook of Criminal Justice Statistics. So if you get rid of the Sourcebook of Criminal Justice Statistics, will there be a crime section in the Statistical Abstract? Like the Statistical Abstract, not all the numbers, including the governmental ones, are coming directly off of Department of Justice pages. A lot of things are the word that Alana used a lot, imputations. So often what they're doing is they're going in and they're doing different calculations for you. Now, hopefully, this will continue in some form. It may become a paid. It may be that they're able to get some type of other grants. We're not sure. But one thing to show you that at least could be a partial alternative is the National Archive of Criminal Justice Data. So if you belong to a university, chances are your university subscribes to ICPSR, world's largest data archive. But what a lot of people don't know is that ICPSR also acts as the archive for many different bodies. ICPSR is a membership. Your place has to pay a membership fee. However, all the other parts of it are free to anyone, whether you're a member or not. So we have, in this country, the National Archives, but we do not have a national archive. That makes no sense whatsoever, probably. But if you go to almost any other country, they have an archive that actually houses not only publications, but data. And not only data coming from their government, but also from universities, etc. So our National Archives archives a select portion of publications emanating from the US government and an even more select portion of the data coming out of government programs. But it has no responsibility, nor does it archive any of the data that is coming out from any other body of the United States. So the Department of Justice pays ICPSR using our money to serve as their full archive for the data that they produce. So this again, even if you're not a member of ICPSR, you can still get to this. If you're a member of ICPSR, it's also integrated into the main search, but if not, you can still get to this. So what they've done is they've provided a number of data resource guides, including some publications like Capital Punishment in the United States. Some of these actually have print counterparts, but not all of them do. You can always see what are the latest things that they have added. There are a few things that are restricted. But what I wanted to show you was this part. If we go into a section called Analyze Data Online, they, like many other bodies, are using a system called survey data analysis, and this is something that University of California, Berkeley came up with. And it was a way for non-statisticians to be able to quickly get cross-tabulations of data on a number of different items. And so what they've done, I didn't mean to click on that one, let's see. What they have done is, so you can get frequencies, crosstabs, etc. It's not all their data, but it's a fair amount. You can search across variables to see the questions, and you can see which actual data sets they've done. And the look is always the same. So let's just say I was interested in Annual Survey of Jails, which looks at jails as opposed to state or nationally controlled prisons. And I could get the full data if I chose, but if not, I can go to this called Analyze Data using SDA. And they do require you to create an account. You can use your Google account, Facebook account, or you can create an ICPSR data account, even if you're not a member of ICPSR. And you are always agreeing to various terms that basically you have dealt with real people or real prisons in this case, and that you're not going to try to do horrible things. So, all right, so you can come in and you can say, all right, I am interested in perhaps by state, and I needed to know things about how many confined persons, i.e. people in these prisons, or jails that there are. And I can do confidence intervals, which after Alana's talk, we all feel more comfortable about. And I can look at standard errors and so forth. I could do a 3D. So for those of you that didn't think The Hobbit was excited enough, but I can run a table, essentially. And let's see. Okay, so they actually gave me a clue. And they basically said, you know, you might want to do this just the opposite. Okay, so what I could do is say, I want the I'm going to put state here. And it's about the way that their rows and columns work. Oh, shits. This worked so well last night. Okay. I'm going to do another variable. All right. So state. That's my column. And persons, it's my row. That should work. Doesn't work this time, I give up. All right. Oh, shits. Well, anyway, trust me. Usually this works. Let's pick one that. Okay. Okay, exactly. So anyway, it gives you nice little tables, usually. All right. Okay. It's going to say confined persons one more time. That's my row. And I want to looking at whether or not the people had home detention. All right, and then it's going to give me, without knowing anything about statistics, this is probably not a terribly interesting one, but the number of people that had home detention by the item, and then it'll even give you some graphs and stuff. This was probably not a great case. But you can get quick statistics off of this, off of a lot of different things. And this is free. Okay, so the statistical abstract, as anyone who has read anything knows, has gone commercial. And it actually just got released. And for disclosure reasons, there was a board, an advisory board that was formed. I served on the advisory board along with people from various academic and public institutions of different sizes throughout the country. And we had no say on pricing, but we were asked about things that we wish had been in the former one. We were asked about things that should be different and so forth. So it exists in two forms. Bernan, which already distributes many government documents, is going to distribute the print, and ProQuest, who's the body that we actually worked with, is doing the electronic. So first, the print, $179. The online part, if you belong to a consortium, you can almost always get discounts, but just the range of pricing ranges anywhere from $400 to $1,995, depending on the size of your either university or your community. And again, if you have a consortium, you may get better pricing than that. So let's talk about the details of it. There are 1,420 tables, which is actually slightly more than the previous. It's almost the same. The bigger part was, again, everyone thinks of it as government information, but there's actually quite a bit of information in it that's not government, that comes from commercial sources. And so one of the things that they had to do is, when the government was doing this, so many items had been there for decades that I think the companies didn't even think about it. It was just sort of viewed as in perpetuity that they would have the rights. But when ProQuest got this, they had to contact every agency that was not public in order to get the rights to. Some of them didn't respond. Some of them said, our stuff is in there? It's not going to be in there anymore. And so they secured rights to 93% of the copyrighted tables if you look at last year's edition. So what does that translate to? Actually, there were only 19 that were lost. And of those, 6 of them, they said, we have federal data that we're going to be able to use instead of commercial data that were clear substitutes. Now the other thing, this got a lot of publicity, but I don't think enough publicity, is that one of the things that this is not just grabbing a bunch of tables from the internet and sticking them in a book. There was a huge statistical agency that, in some cases, yes, copied tables, but often did a lot of work to make the tables usable. So one example is if I go to the National Center for Education Statistics, I am not going to see educational attainment rates. I will figure out how many people are in high school, how many people are in college, but I can't actually figure out what percentage of the population has a bachelor's degree, a high school degree, etc. So they do a lot of work behind the scenes. They made offers to all of the people who were working in the Census Bureau who had just lost their jobs. Now, some people obviously were not able to take that offer, but many of them did. And so they've taken those people in. So for the most part, it's the same people that continue to compile. Now, there is some content that was lost. The content that was lost primarily related to either financial or industry data that was proprietary and the agencies were not willing to cooperate. There were a few cases where the items were coming from an international governmental body, and those governmental bodies never got back to them. They are still hoping that eventually those bodies, like the FAO, will get back to them, and they will be able to include those in future editions. There were some tables in the book that had partial public data, partial private data. Now, the public data is obviously never a problem, but the private data, in the cases where the agency said no, that information had to be stripped out, and there are a few examples of that. One of the things that we were asked is, what were the types of things that you would like to see that were never included? And a lot of us said, we want more stuff at lower levels of geography, by state, by city, anything you can get us. It doesn't even matter what it is, just get it. And well, I said that's not quite so easy. So, but some of the things that did come up a lot was real estate. You know, we've been through a major crisis in this country, so anything you can get about that. Same-sex households, given how much this is in the news. Also things like alternative energy we were interested in, alternative ways of commuting, religion. And religion's tricky because, of course, the US government is not allowed to ask questions about religion since 1940. So it was going to other bodies that had questions about religion. They have a really nice site up. It's a LibGuide, of course, given librarians were involved with this. And what it's done is it tells you about, there are a number of webinars that you can watch on the new content, of how it's structured and so forth. One of the nicest things that's coming out of this is when the government had it, there was the print book, and the print book was put online, but that's all it was. The print book was put online. And so every year, as you added another year, you chopped off a year. Now, everyone I work with is interested in historical time series. That's going to stop. So they're no longer going to keep scratching off years in the Excel version. Now, if you buy the book, obviously, there's only so much space in the book. And so one of the things that also came up with is how can we have the two match each other? So one of the things that was decided was that there would be a PDF that would be a snapshot once a year, so that if you got the electronic and didn't have the book, you would have that. But for everyone else, at least, you would have the PDF, but you would also have Excel spreadsheets that kept growing. Then, of course, we said, can you go back? And they said, for that price, you must be kidding. So that's not going to happen, but at least they will keep going forward. Now, that said, sometimes something will happen where they have no choice. So for example, when SIC went to NAICS codes, it's a completely different classification. So there'll be things like that they just can't do, but how many museums, how many jails are there, how many? That type of stuff, there's no reason. So that should continue. Now, what I'm hoping is not going to happen is as more agencies face budget cuts, that they don't start eliminating their major publications, because we've already seen a couple of agencies do it. So just as there's the ones for crime, there are major counterparts for health and digestive education statistics. Just like the crime one, yes, there are tiny sections in the statistical abstract that deal with health and education, but these go into much more detail. They are free. They are part of the government printing office program. But they haven't said they're going away, but let's hope that they do not. If you have any questions or you'd like to contact us at any point, this is our contact information. And if you have questions for Ryan or I, we'll try to share our little tiny microphone. So, any questions? Nope. Okay, then we don't have to share our little mic. All right.